Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 49 of the Hot Path Show. I'm Johnny, doing a solo episode here today, doing a little launch party episode for, of course, the things that I just released the other day. That being, actually, I probably should pull this up on the screen to show everybody, but some of you may have seen that I launched a game alongside a couple other things here. The game, of course, is Dot Survivors. Talked about it a little bit here and there on the stream and all that. The game at Dot Survivors, it's out now for free, available on Steam. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat if anyone wants to go check that out. So this is the actual game. And then over on the Unity Asset Store, I also have all the project files as well as a bunch of Dot's learning resources kind of available with this all as well. So over on the Unity Asset Store, there's the Dot Survivors Complete ECS Game Project and Instructional Documentation available for purchase there. And I'm super excited to have it all out there. Very happy with the reception so far. And so, just wanted to do today's video to just be a little kind of launch party thing, talk about the game, the Asset Store product, as well as also put up a tutorial the other day, a big 4.5 hour long tutorial, basically just kind of like doing a simplified Survivors type game. So you can kind of see, this is it. This is the actual the launched game here, but I can kind of fast forward a little bit here. And this is the more simplified version where it's just a little bit more basic of just kind of a very simple Survivors type game. I feel like it's a good kind of introduction into ECS and all that. So we're going to be talking about these things here today. So welcome in, everybody. Hope people are doing well. And before we get into things, I just have a couple quick little announcements here. Really just kind of one announcement, I suppose. So next week is GDC, the Game Developers Conference. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be there in person next week. It's going to be the first GDC that I'm missing out on in a number of years. Unfortunately, just couldn't make it work this year. I'm actually going to be moving in a couple weeks, so I have like a bunch of stuff to get taken care of for that. And anyways, if you are going to be there, I hope you have a great time. I know Unity is going to be doing a bunch of talks. So if you actually go to the GDC website and under Conf and Expo, you can click on Agenda. And then the way I filter it down is if you go into Formats and just check mark the box for Sponsored Developer Summit, it shows kind of all the sponsored developer sessions that are kind of available to everybody. And so these are, ones put on by Adobe, Meta, you see Tencent, and then it has all of Unity's talks as well. And because these are technically sponsored sessions, you can get into these talks with any type of pass. You don't need to have like the, specific all access one that gives you, access to all the kind of like main sessions and everything. So, definitely cool stuff there for that. So all the Unity talks, they're doing a bunch of talks on Monday and Tuesday of next week. The first one is they have the Unity Developer Summit, the Unity Engine Roadmap. And so this one, they're going to be, click on this and see specifically what it says. Want a sneak peek of the future? Join us at GDC 2025 for a can't miss session exploring the latest advancements in the Unity editor and engine. In just 1 hour, we'll dive into the innovations shaping Unity 6, our current generational release, including upgrades to graphics performance, expanded platform support, and industry-leading tools. Discover how creativity, efficiency, and innovation come together to empower creators like you. Takeaway. Anything interesting in here? Talking about some Unity 6.1 enhancements, getting some insight into stunning visuals, improved performance, streamlined stability, and all that stuff. So I think this will be interesting. Like any of the new Unity announcements or stuff is usually kind of during this little roadmap session. I haven't heard any word if there's going to be any new particular things being gone over in here. But I would like to do an episode of the Hot Bath Show next week, kind of talking about anything particularly that, might be in there. I know last year, the recording for their kind of main roadmap session was available pretty shortly after. So hoping that is the case as well, just to see, kind of all what's going on in there. And welcome in, Mr. Awesome. Appreciate the congrats. Very excited to have it out there, and seems like people have been enjoying it so far. So I'm very happy with it all. Anyways, as far as GDC also goes, again, Unity has a bunch of other talks throughout the day on Monday and Tuesday. I think there's a lot of like mildly interesting seeming talks. It didn't seem like there's anything like, crazy jumping out at me where it's like, oh, I'm really mad that I'm missing this one. It didn't seem like, I think the closest one to like a kind of like dots talk was this multiplayer one, accelerating the creation of your competitive multiplayer game. So this one's put on by Esteban. And I think this kind of goes into talking a little bit about some multiplayer stuff, some of the tools they have. And I think they mentioned some, talk about this intended for intermediate to advanced developers having some experience with ECS for single player or Unity games using other ECS solutions. Because I think they're going over some netcode for entities type stuff in this talk. I did see there was another talk, I think, about from a performance consultant that seemed kind of interesting as well. So yeah, I think there's some good stuff there. But so anyways, if you're going to be at GDC, of course, enjoy your time out there. And hopefully we'll be having some interesting things to talk about next week on the Hot Path Show. So anything else that I want to go over before getting into it? I don't really think so. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of talk about the game a little bit, and if there is any questions that people have about the game, asset store product, whatever, can definitely get into that. So maybe I'll start just by kind of playing the game here real quick. Go ahead and share this screen. And I'll just go ahead and play it in the editor right here. So let me see how this volume level is doing. Actually, I don't have any music on there. We're gonna get a little music, some sound effects going there. All right. Let's go ahead and, of course, play as Turbo. And let's go to the Mars scene. The Mars scene's fun. All right, so we loaded in, and this is the game. I mean, it's a survivors type game, so we have different weapons. Of course, this is a starting weapon, the Plasma Blaster, and we can collect the little gems to level up, and we can get new weapons as well as upgrades. So it doesn't look like we have any weapons that we can get, but let's go ahead and say reduce the incoming damage by 1. So anyways, I mean, this is kind of the main game loop, is you're kind of just going through, destroying all these aliens, collecting gems, using those gems to level you up, get better stuff. And so we can, of course, get new things as well as upgrade existing things. Having about this, did you do an event system for the sounds? I can show you what I did for the sounds here. It's kind of like a pooling solution, basically, where we just have a bunch of like mono behavior, like sound, what do you call it, audio sources. And then just from the ECS side, I can kind of send over to that basically pooling solution. It'll get one of those audio sources, assign the correct clip to it, and then play the clip. There's kind of some interesting things that we have to do. So one of them, for example, is say that the busted buzzsaw. The sound effect is a looping sound effect, because we basically want it to like continually play as long as it's kind of in the game world. Hopefully that the sound is not too annoying coming through on stream there. but yeah, so there's kind of some interesting things we have to do for like looping sound effects versus more one-shot sound effects where, we kind of like shoot out, say, the plasma blast and just has that like, phew, and then or like when we actually damage an entity and an enemy and they have like a just brief little taking damage sound effect. So yeah, there's kind of some interesting things in there. Also, you'll see that this red alien here kind of has a little bit of a glow around it, and that's because he's a boss. So we can actually see if we can destroy this guy here. I'm kind of taking some damage here, just to try to line up some good shots on this guy. He's kind of protected by some guys, but we can try and see if we can get him with the drone one. Kind of like this drone attack. You can kind of angle it to hit some particular entities that you want. Okay, so we did destroy the boss, but he only dropped a red gem, which will give us a lot of experience points. So that kind of levels us up right away. And yeah, we can get kind of some of the, say, the health regeneration here. And yeah, so I mean, this is kind of the core game loop. And so you can see here that we can choose to level things up, and each level up it can do different things. So like actually in this case, for the oxygen hose as well as the drone swarm, we're both just kind of like adding another thing. But we can also change any of these statistics that we want for whatever weapon it is. So maybe we want to increase the damage output, decrease the cooldown time, all kinds of things. Those are all hooked into this leveling up system as well. And I'm super happy with how this level up system turned out as well. So yeah, we can kind of upgrade the drone swarm here. But yeah. Oh, and then so also we have so like there's like these little altar things, and with those, they basically will drop a random item, and it kind of uses like a little bit of a weighted random, and actually the level up like kind of selection, like to determine what upgrades should be shown to a player. So that's all kind of uses a weighted random, so that there's like certain things that are more likely or less likely to appear. So yeah, you can see that these are these little altars, and then when you destroy them, then it's going to drop something like the ice cream sandwiches. The ice cream sandwiches are basically just health pickups, but it can also drop you money, as well as what else does it drop? It can drop experience point gems, and yeah, just kind of like random little pickup items like that. So yeah, anyways, this is the game. Super happy with it. Excited to have it out there finally. Runs great, of course, on PC as well as Steam Deck. Pretty much runs at locked 60 frames per second throughout kind of all the gameplay scenarios that I've been testing in. So very exciting. So yeah, what kind of specifically do you want to see with the stats on that? And so, by the way, while you're kind of maybe typing that out, I do just want to real quickly show what's going on for the audio stuff. So actually, if we can kind of, I'll just enter play mode again and turn off that, and we're just kind of get in the game here. So yeah, you'll see that there is a, where is it? Is it under game controllers? Yes, we have this audio controller, and then under it, we have a bunch of these audio sources. So these are kind of like the regular audio sources for just like the one-shot sound effects. We also have some audio sources for looping ones, as well as some pause-resistant audio sources. Pause-resistant audio sources are basically the same as like one-shot audio sources, but they just, of course, are not affected by pause. That's basically just because I wanted to like play some certain sound effects, like when the game pauses. So like, for example, when you level up, the game technically pauses, but I still want to play that little like kind of sound. So we kind of have these like this thing for pause resistant sound effects. And actually just kind of getting into how this game audio controller is all set up. You can see basically here we have so it's a singleton instance, so we can kind of like access it from anywhere essentially. And so we have kind of the pool count, how many of the different audio sources do we want to create, and then be able to play sound effects through there. We have different audio mixers, audio mixer groups, and all that to kind of independently control the audio volume for each of the channels for background music and sound effects. And then, so as you can imagine, kind of at the beginning, we go through, we just instantiate these all in the pool. And then we have something like this, play SFX audio clip, where you pass in the audio clip as well as a priority value. This priority value is something that the audio sources uses to kind of determine, if there's like a lot of audio sources being played at once. Unity kind of has like a limit of how many of these can play. And then so audio sources with like a higher priority level, which is actually a lower number. Because if we go into this little kind of helper enum you'll see that the highest priority is 0 and the lowest priority is 255. And so basically when we have kind of we assign kind of priority values to these, and then then Unity basically figures out ones with lower priorities. Then when we're kind of at that limit of how many audio sources are playing, then those ones are going to get essentially muted. But you can see that kind of all I'm doing is I just have like an array of all these audio sources, and then I just kind of like am indexing into this array, and then each time I access it, I just kind of increment that index, and of course loop it around once it reaches the end of the array. But it basically just plays the audio clip. So no, this is not new audio with dots, unfortunately. That they still don't have a dots audio solution. So this is kind of, just a regular Unity audio stuff. And this is all kind of like inside of mono behavior right now. But how it actually connects with ECS is we can see, some examples of some places that I'm calling this. So I have this play audio clip on damage system. So what happens is if there is an entity that has this play audio clip on damage data, we can look at this here. You can see that this is an iComponent data. It's also an enableable component. So the idea is when an entity basically takes damage, then we set this enabled flag on here, and then it just plays whatever audio clip is stored inside this Unity object ref for audio clip. We can also store a priority value in here. So for example, when we're authoring this, we can, assign a priority value as well as the audio clip just right through the editor. And I can actually just show you how that looks like here. Let's find one of these aliens. So we can see, so we have this play audio clip on damage. You can see that we can set this priority value, and then we can just put in whatever audio clip that we want. And then again, from that, it ends up getting stored inside that audio clip, which is just a Unity object ref. So a way that we can reference Unity objects from the ECS side. And then, again, finally, when it takes damage, we enable this play audio clip on damage data component. And this is the system to actually, kind of query for those entities that have this component enabled. And then we can just call the game audio controller singleton .play SFX audio clip. And then we just pass in the audio clip as well as the priority value. So that's kind of how the audio works. And then again, it gets a little bit interesting with like playing looping audio clips, because we also need to have the looping audio clips stop. So we can kind of just like store the index. So I kind of like pass back the index and store that in like a cleanup component. So I'm doing some kind of interesting things on that. And by the way, I should mention that over on the documentation website, I have kind of all this stuff documented here. So if we go into where to be other core concepts and audio, then you can see the whole audio setup here. So kind of go into the audio. Here's like some stuff on the sound effects, looping sound effects, pausing game audio. And if you want to watch a video on it, you can do that all here. So this is kind of the documentation website, and you can see that I just have like a ton of information on all the like main core concepts of this application. So if you want to see, how the character movement works, you can go into that. And I actually have 2 videos on character movement, because there's kind of the main stuff as well as some like additional interesting things that I kind of found in there. So I'm super happy with how that documentation site turns out. And I think it's a good way to access kind of all the information on there. So no, I did not use any generative AI for the code. It's all, it's all ECS stuff. So, Unity or the LLMs don't do super well with a lot of the ECS stuff. It just kind of really gets confused. I'm sure there were probably times that I did a couple references where it's 3 a.m. or whatever, and I'm like, what is that Unity API that does this thing? Just kind of using it as a Google basically, but no generative AI for the code here. This was all handwritten. Let's see. Appreciate it. Very excited to have the game out there on Steam. Very exciting stuff. So let's see. I create a prefab with the audio source on an entity and destroy it when it's done, since play on awake works. That makes sense. So rather than kind of doing a pooling solution, you're kind of just using kind of the prefab stuff on it. So that totally works there. Is it possible to have all those authoring scripts combined down to a single enemy author script? Yeah, so interesting that you asked that. So actually, I'll leave that up there. So you see that when we're over on the enemies, we have a bunch of these. So there's character authoring, enemy authoring, drop experience on destroy, knockback, show damage number, and all this stuff, right? There definitely is, you certainly can, if you want to, combine all those authoring scripts into just one kind of general or just one enemy authoring one. The reason that I did not do that is because a lot of these things end up getting shared between a bunch of the different enemies, or a bunch of the different entities rather. So if we go into, say, character authoring, can see all the stuff that's required on here. Got to scroll down a little bit. I have a lot of stuff in this script here. So you can see that for character authoring, it adds a bunch of components. We're setting some component data. We're say disabling certain stuff. So there's kind of a lot of stuff happening here. And basically, if I wanted to do the kind of more flat solution, that certainly is a lot cleaner, where we just have one authoring component per entity type. All this stuff in this character authoring, this is shared between player characters as well as enemy characters. So that means that I kind of have to replicate all this in both the player authoring as well as the enemy authoring stuff. And for something like that, where it's just in 2 places, it's not too terribly that bad to just kind of copy paste it over. But of course, as you're going throughout development, and maybe you want to add some things that kind of should apply to both players as well as enemies. You have to make sure that you add that in both places, make sure everything is set up correctly. You're not setting one thing enabled in one place and disabled in the other place. And also there are some cases where it doesn't look like I'm doing it in here, but inside these bakers, we're actually kind of like doing a little bit of manipulation on the authoring data where, for example, maybe we're authoring a rotation in degrees per second. We kind of have this in the authoring portion, but we want to store that data in radians per second because that's what all the kind of like math functions use. So, it's nice to have that kind of authoring side of things where we're authoring it in degrees, which is a nice, human friendly data format. And then, have to convert that over into radians in there. Of course, that's a simple example. There are, more complex examples where we're doing, more massaging and manipulation of the authoring data to get it into the kind of ECS data that we want. And again, we just need to make sure that we're doing that in all places. So having all these, separate authoring components, this is a way for us to essentially share data across a bunch of different things. So, for example, if we go into the specific enemy authoring one and go to the actual authoring component, what I did is I have the require component attribute above the enemy authoring. And this require component attribute, this is just kind of the like regular Unity require component. So it says, hey, we have this mono behavior, but to have this mono behavior, it also requires the existence of all these other mono behaviors here. So essentially what that means is when you add the enemy authoring, it will also add the character authoring. It adds the drop experience on destroy authoring. It also adds the show damage number authoring as well. So all this stuff is kind of added. It's a little bit of like a kind of like hierarchical approach here. So again, I think it's good for being able to share functionality across a bunch of different entities. But yeah, it definitely does lead to, a little bit of this kind of being messy where we have like a bunch of different authoring components and like some of these just have like, one or even zero fields on them. So yeah, and it ends up kind of getting a little bit crazy. Like if we go into character authoring, you'll see that character, so like, we go from enemy now to character authoring. And so this requires the damageable entity authoring. Damageable entity authoring requires destructible entity authoring. And then destructible entity authoring is kind of the end of the line. And again, I kind of need this hierarchical approach because, I want some things that, can be destroyed via this destructible entity authoring, but, they don't necessarily have like a damage component. They don't need to like take damage. Like for example, items should be able to be destroyed. So all the items have the destructible entity authoring, this right here, because this basically just adds the destroy entity flag and sets it as false by default. But it doesn't like take damage. So it doesn't have like a current hit points or base hit points. Like it just needs to be destroyed. So again, there's like some places where it's like kind of all the, overlapping Venn diagrams almost of like, what does this entity need that is also shared by, some of these other entities. So yeah. So the required components is similar to having a reference to another script in an OO approach. I wouldn't say it's having a reference to it. It just means that when we add one authoring component, it will also add a bunch of other authoring components, which is just kind of a way to say, again, we're not using this to like set up references between things, but it's just a way to say that it's a way for us to guarantee that if we have a character, then it's going to have, the destructible entity authoring and damageable entity authoring. So we can kind of like guarantee that anything that's a player is going to have, all these other components. So we don't have to like worry about that when we say are iterating across a character entity, we, can be sure that it has, say, things that are, on this damageable entity authoring. So it's kind of like a way for us to again, be sure that all that functionality is present. I've been taking advantage of OO inheritance in the bakers to share components. Interesting. Has it been working out pretty well for you? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things, there's pros and cons to it. Um, Again, I think the kind of flat hierarchy or the flat approach is certainly a lot cleaner. But I do think that this is a good solution, and so I'm kind of glad that I ended up going with this particular. Hell yeah, brother. Awesome. Good to hear. Yeah. So, and of course, yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to fire away. But one of the things that I did want to talk about is actually a mistake that I made during game development. And I do kind of have a nice little write up about this in the kind of post mortem section here. And so that's this right here, the 2D on the XZ axes. So yeah, you'll see that, if we look at, say, the scene view right here, you'll see that this is kind of on the Z and X axis. So basically the character is of course moving left to right on the X axis, and they're moving up and down on the screen on the Z axis. And this is just a little bit of like a kind of bad situation that I got myself in early on. Didn't realize what I was doing at the time, and then like by the time that I realized it probably wasn't the greatest solution, then I mean it was already too late because I had so much things set up for this, and it's just like it's not really worth it to go and change everything because like it all works. But it's just kind of like there are some things that would be nice about having it in the XY axes instead. So if we go into the scene here and then go into kind of the 3D view. So you see that like basically what's happening is this kind of plane here, the XZ plane. This is just kind of like the regular, what Unity displays is like that big kind of grid plane. And then, so what I have is the camera up above in the Y-axis looking down on here. And because I just, when I was originally developing this, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing a top-down game. I'll just have it go around in the, XZ plane here, and then, have the camera up above following it along. And so, yeah, that kind of ended up working fine for the early stages of development. But yeah, kind of led into some maybe not so great things later on. So one of the things, and this is just like a simple little thing, but if you click this little 2D button, it goes into the XY view. So this doesn't, I can't see anything because we're, perpendicular to everything. So, it kind of would be nice to just be able to, hit that 2D button and see the scene view. But anyways, that's kind of a little thing. The more important things are if we go into, say, well, I guess we get this armor alien guy here. So if we open this up and go here, so you'll see that the guy itself, it needs to be on this XZ plane here as well, right? And so unfortunately, when you just drag a regular quad into the scene, it actually has them up like this. So again, if we hit the 2D, it displays there nicely. But because I'm doing kind of this top-down approach, now I had to basically rotate the entity by 90 degrees along the x-axis. So now it's like, pointing up to face the camera. Now, what I was, of course, originally doing is I had all my graphics on kind of the base entity itself. But what I quickly realized is that now I have to add this 90-degree rotation on the x-axis. And then it's like, anytime I want to spawn an entity through code, I need to, consider this 90-degree rotation. And then like, if I want to do some other rotations, I have to factor in this 90-degree rotation as well, because it's like just not like natural. Like you just kind of like, it's an additional thing that you need to factor in, which again, not like crazy difficult in most cases, but it's just like, another thing that you have to remember to do every time you're kind of manipulating rotations or factoring that stuff in. So I ended up, creating a separate graphics entity to be a child of the main entity. So we kind of have this main armor alien with all the essentially data. It has the colliders as well. But then we have a child entity for the graphics entity. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, but I think having a separate graphics entity is not necessarily a terrible idea. There are kind of some advantages and disadvantages to it. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But I just want to stay on a couple things about a couple other things about the XZ plane and all that. So one of the actually, I don't know where I have this specifically in code, but one thing that I do want to point out is that, say, not right now, anytime that I have like a 2D vector and I want to use that to move an entity in 3D space, because of course the game plays out in 3D space, what I have to do is, like, for example, I have this, say, var move direction here, which is a float 2. And then we're moving it, by 1 in the x-axis, 0 in the y-axis. To translate that over to 3D, I have to do, new float 3, and then pass in move direction.x for the x component, pass in a 0 for the y component, and then for the z component, I use move direction.y. So, I mean, this is like a pretty normal thing for, game development. So it's like not like a difficult thing to do or anything, but it's just like, a little bit more typing, because you have to, like, get the X component and then, remember to do the Y component for the Z component there. So, it can be, I wouldn't say messy, but it's just like a little, and whatever. But there is a much cleaner way to do this if I'm using the XY axes, where I can just take this float 2, and when I'm creating a new float 3, I can pass in just the float 2 move direction as the first argument. And then the Z argument can be whatever, Z offset that I want. So, of course, if I don't want it to change anything in the Z direction, which I typically don't, just pass in 0. But say you're like spawning something and you kind of have like an XY position of where you want to spawn something, you can just pass in, say, that XY spawn position for the first argument. And then the Z can just be like depth. Like, do you want it a little further from the camera, a little closer to the camera? So you can kind of have like a little bit more, control like that. Of course you can still do that with this approach here, but it's like, again, a little bit messier, because you have like kind of the move direction, and then you have your depth, and you have your other half of the move direction. Where again is this, you literally just passing in the float 2 and then that depth that you want. So I just think this is like way cleaner. This is actually how I did it in the survivors tutorial here. So actually I'm kind of like almost on the right place here. So yeah, you see that what I'm doing here is just taking that float 3 and just passing in that 2D move step there. So I think that's way cleaner, and I wish I kind of would have done things that way. But again, it was just like way too much to unwind, by the time that I kind of like realized that would be a better approach, because again, I have all these entities with this graphics entity set to 90 degrees. I have like so many functions where I'm, manipulating float 3s on the X and Z axis. And it's like, I have to change all that stuff over. And it's like, I mean, I don't get any benefit from it really, because I'm like at such a late stage in development where it's like, you would be able to take better advantage of this stuff if you kind of made that decision earlier on. So yeah. So anyways, that's kind of one of the things that I'm like, wish I would have done it the other way, but whatever. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of having the, actually I'll pull this up. Why do you need to pass 0 explicitly instead of using the implicit 2D to 3D conversion. So I don't know if there actually is one for float threes. I could be wrong, but because I know you can't do where is it? You cannot do just a new float three passing in a float two as an argument. And so yeah, I don't remember if I mean guess we could test it out to see if we can just cast a float two to a float three. Say var move 2D equals new float 2, pass in 0, 1, and say var move 3D equals float 3 of move 2D. Yeah, so it looks like that doesn't work. So yeah, you can't do the implicit conversion. Wait. Yeah, cannot cast float 2 to float 3. So yeah, you have to explicitly say new float 3 passing in move 2D, and then it doesn't let you just do that. So you do have to pass in 0 for the Z. And hello, welcome in. So yeah. So yeah, the other thing kind of related, yeah, I think you're right. It does work in regular Unity math, but yeah, I guess they just don't have that implicit conversion for the float 3 stuff. So yeah, I did want to talk about, because that doing like that kind of mistake, quote unquote, again, forced me to have this separate graphics entity. And again, I kind of have a little bit more in-depth thoughts of this in the documentation site about the pros and cons of this kind of separate graphics entity. Overall, I think it's makes sense to have this separate graphics entity for a couple of reasons. One of them is just kind of reducing a little bit of memory footprint from the main entity. Because of course, for things like these aliens, where we have you can see there's a lot of components on here. There's a lot of custom stuff that we're adding. There's a lot of stuff that comes from the Unity physics stuff, and just kind of again all the transform stuff. And again, these are in a transform hierarchy, so it has the full linked entity group and all that stuff, right? So there ends up being a fair bit of memory on these alien entities. And because we have so many of these alien entities, we want to fit as many of these into a single chunk as possible for the just like best performance. As we're iterating through, we don't want to have to go to different chunks of memory to iterate through a bunch of these alien entities. So ideally we want to get as many a number as high as possible of alien entities within these alien chunks. I think last time I looked, I haven't looked since I kind of shipped the game, so I don't remember. I don't know how much this has changed, but I know when it was fairly mature, when it had probably most of these components on here, I think it was only able to fit around 32 aliens within a chunk, which kind of a low number. That I'd like that to be a lot better. The kind of max number that we can have is 128. So of course would like to be as close to that as possible. I do have some thoughts about some ways that I could increase that number by a fair bit, but I mean, it kind of is what it is for now. But anyways, so again, by having this separate graphics entity, that just kind of reduces the memory footprint of the base alien entity, so that we can fit more of those base alien entities within one chunk, because we're taking memory out of that, we're moving it into a separate entity. So that is kind of one thing, is we have a little bit of that kind of memory footprint reduction. Awesome, and glad to hear that it was been very stable for you. So yeah, that's kind of one thing, and then the other thing is just kind of like having this separate graphics entity allows us to do some different effects on the entity, or just on the graphics entity without affecting the main entity itself. So one example I have of that is actually if we go back into the game here, you can see that I'm kind of taking advantage of that with these plasma blasts. So I'll kind of get far away from these aliens. So you can see that the plasma blast, it's kind of rotating, it's like pulsing a little bit, and it's also kind of moving towards the closest enemies. So this is actually doing like 3 separate kind of transformations. So basically what's happening is kind of the main what's it called, the main plasma blast kind of like top level entity, that's kind of when it spawns, it sets its rotation towards the closest enemy, and then throughout its life cycle it just continually moves straight forward. Now with the separate graphics entity, I can have this separate graphics entity basically just rotate that little graphical effect within its kind of local space. So it's just kind of, the base entity is moving towards that closest enemy, and then the kind of child entity, the graphics entity, is like continually rotating. Now this ends up being, of course, a little bit of a problem because if we were to have the graphics entity be on the base entity, because we couldn't like just rotate the transform because it's going in its forward direction. So if we're continually rotating it, then it's just going to like go in a circle, which is not what we want. We want to of course, go straight forward to the closest enemy there. And so, yeah, then we can, again, change the rotation on the child entity and also the scale. So actually, if I go over to the actual plasma blast itself, so yeah, you'll see that this has, so yeah, I think it's actually in the plasma blast entity authoring. It has, this linear movement speed, which basically will move it just straight forward. And then, we have this separate graphics entity, which, again, this is kind of rotated on that 90 degrees to kind of account for that. And then, we're just kind of, again, rotating this around the y-axis to kind of get that rotation in place. And again, that doesn't affect the kind of base entity. So I have this constant rotation authoring. So you'll see that this, so actually it's the along the z-axis because I think because of that like 90-degree rotation or something. So yeah, this is authored in Euler degrees per second, and then we actually can convert this over to, if I can open this, hello. Then in the authoring, we actually convert this over to radians per second, and then just apply that rotation throughout the duration of the life cycle there. And also have this scale oscillation to basically just kind of give it a slight little pulsing effect for it to, increase and decrease in size there. So yeah, so I think that's kind of one of the good things about having that separate graphics entity is we can like do separate things that don't affect kind of that base entity. Although I will say one of the kind of annoying things that we have to do is, let me go back to one of these aliens. So again, the kind of base alien has the, colliders, rigid bodies, and all that stuff. So this is like, taking damage from all the different player attacks. So it kind of like is detecting that collision. This is also storing, the current hit points to know, when it should be destroyed and all that stuff. Because again, this is kind of the base entity where all that stuff is stored on. However, if we want to say play some effects, like you'll see, again, going back into the game, actually we probably won't be able to see it because these enemies are super weak. But actually, we can see it probably on the player. So I'll have the player get damaged and watch the player's sprite. You'll see that the player's sprite kind of flashes. It actually flashes like black and red. And so basically what's happening there is we're kind of using the material property overrides to just kind of like override that color. And so I have this flash color on damage authoring script here. And so this is kind of what controls basically like when this entity takes damage, it kind of does some stuff with some timers to first set it to black and then set it to red to kind of have that like little damage effect. So like, again, when these entities take damage, then they're going to flash that certain color. But again, this ends up being a little bit of a problem because the base entity is the thing that's like taking damage. And then, so like in a kind of our damage taking script, then we kind of have to, do stuff with taking the damage, decreasing your hit points and all that. But then also we need to reference the separate graphics entity and then, set the data components on here. I think it's basically just enabling the like a data component to actually control this, to like kind of like initialize this flash damage behavior. But again, it's just kind of like an extra entity reference that we have to go through. So what I mean by that is like if we had the graphic stuff all on the same base entity, now the base entity that takes damage, we can just immediately do the flash effect right there on that same entity. We don't have to like go reference that separate entity. So again, not that big of a deal, but it is technically just like, one other entity that we have to reference. But it's not like a super hot path of the code or anything. There you go. Said the name of the show. Because, you got to think of like how frequently are things taking damage. And it's like, worst case, like 2 per frame at the absolute worst case, but really it's like 1 every 0.1 seconds. I don't know. So yeah, how do you keep reference to graphics? On main entity. So we have on, where is it? I I have a separate graphics entity authoring, as you can imagine, and so this literally just has an iComponent data reference to the entity there, and then inside, when we're editing the prefab, we can just drag this graphics entity in here, and then when everything gets converted over into an entity, then this graphics entity is actually kind of stored in there. So yeah. And I guess actually while we're on the topic of this graphics entity, you may see that I have this checkbox for this play destruction animation. And I don't know how well we'll be able to see it through the stream here. But if you look very closely, actually, maybe I can zoom in a little bit here. If you look very closely at the aliens when they're being destroyed, they kind of have this little like dissolve effect. So actually, I'm going to get away here. So you see when they get destroyed, they have the little kind of dissolve effect here where they just kind of dissolve away. So they don't like immediately just get destroyed. There's like a little bit of like a animation to just kind of like signify their destruction. So I can kind of show you how that's all set up here. Because actually I think it is kind of interesting. So I just double click that. Whoops. So I'll need to find the shader. So I can look at, this one's fine. I think this will be for the player, but it should have this same dissolve effect. So yeah, it kind of has this little like Voronoi pattern here. And then we have this like little dissolve value that goes from 0 to 1. And actually, so I think if I change this here, nope. Do we need to be, yeah, I think we're for on here. We can see, so this is basically the alpha channel, and because I have like alpha clipping enabled, this isn't using any transparent shaders for this. So because I have alpha clipping with this Voronoi, I can kind of like basically just kind of have this little like dissolve effect where it kind of like puts holes basically in the um, kind of mesh here, and then just eventually just kind of dissolves the whole thing away. So it's kind of set up in this little shader here that are on both the players as well as the enemies. And then, so you'll see that I have this graphics entity play destroy effect tag. Okay. And then this is actually used in the destroy entity system. So I kind of have this like one central entity destruction system. Of course, I go into a lot of detail in the documentation site for this project on kind of what I'm using these, how I'm using these entity destruction systems. So yeah, basically we can see when we're destroying an entity, if it has this graphics entity play destroy effect tag, and again, this tag is actually sitting on kind of the main entity. So no, actually do not swap out a game object. So all the rendering, again, these are all just like kind of quad meshes inside entity graphics, and that's for all the entities in the game is like that. So actually what I'm doing is something kind of clever. I think it's clever, where when we're destroying it, we get a reference to the graphics entity. So we can just say get components graphics entity dot value. So we get the actual graphics entity, and oh, hey, look at this. What's going on? Oh, so cool. Yeah, glad to see you in here. By the way, Penzilla Design, they're the people who did all the art and audio assets for this game. So shout out to Penzilla Design. Thank you very much. Again, I know I've thanked you profusely, but yeah, I'm super happy with all the art stuff and all the audio. So I think it fits the game totally great. So yeah, shout out. And yeah, glad to have you stopping by here. And so yeah, what I was saying for this entity graphics destruction here is we kind of get a reference to that graphics entity. And then what we can actually do is use an entity command buffer and do an instantiate on that graphics entity. And so normally when we're kind of like instantiating like this, we're instantiating with prefabs, but this is just instantiating that entity reference that we have. So what this instantiate does is it really just creates a copy of that entity and spawns it into the world. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just spawning a copy of the graphics entity into the world. So it's kind of just the graphics entity. So it doesn't have kind of all this like main stuff that the main entity does. So it doesn't have any of the colliders or any of the hit point data, anything like that. It's literally just the graphics entity. And so what that means is like now it's not effectively part of like the simulation anymore. So when we like scan the screen for all the enemy entities, it's not returning this new graphics entity because it literally is just the graphics portion of it. One kind of funny thing that I have to do to get this to work is remove the local transform component because the local transform is going to be set at position 000 because it's, again, the local transform related to that entity. And so basically when I remove the local transform, it keeps the local to world, and the local to world is the world position of where that graphics entity already is. And this kind of gets into some of the weird stuff about the ECS transform system, but the local transform in ECS's transformation system group, it's going to now basically take that and then override that for the local to world. And then it just kind of puts it at the world position of 000. So anyways, by removing the local transform, we keep the local to world to basically preserve that world position. And then we can kind of add this dissolve data component on there, which provides that little dissolve effect there. So yeah, so the prefab, like all prefabs are going to have a local transform by default. But so actually what we're doing here is we're not instantiating prefab. Again, we're just kind of instantiating a copy of this graphics entity, and then just removing that local transform from it. So a little bit of an interesting setup. And you probably could go through and unparent the graphics entity. I thought this was kind of an interesting approach here. You just also would need to remember to unparent it as well as remove it from the linked entity group of the parent. Because by default, when we destroy the parent, it's going to also destroy everything in the linked entity group. So as long as you unparent it, remove it from the linked entity group, you probably would need to remove the local transform as well, or just set the local transform. But yeah, that would be another valid approach too. So yeah. So yeah, some kind of interesting things with the separate graphics entity there. What else? Yeah, let me know if there's anything that anybody else wants me to go over here while we're kind of chatting about things. I mean, there's so many interesting things in this project. I could talk about this all day, and I pretty much do talk about this all day. I go very into detail on all these different things. Again, over on the kind of documentation site, which you get access to through the purchasing the asset store product. Here's another kind of silly one. In mistakes that I made for custom physics authoring. So I typically like to use the custom physics authoring components that you get from, if you go into the package manager here and where is it? If we go to Unity Physics and then on the samples tab, there's these like custom physics authoring components. Oh yeah, and by the way, because we got Penzil in here, feel free to ask any questions about the graphics and music. Happy to answer. I actually do have a question for you. What software do you typically like to use for creating all the art assets and music stuff? And so yeah, as I was saying on the custom physics authoring stuff, this is where we have kind of the like physics shape, physics body components. What ended up happening is when I went to submit to the asset store, there's this little asset store validator tool here. And it kind of like scans through all your project files and it like sees if you're kind of like in compliance for like all the asset store, whatever. So you can see like, it checks colliders and makes sure there's a demo scene and, all this random stuff, right? So one of them is you can't have anything with a Unity namespace in your project. Now, when you add these like custom physics authoring components, it puts these samples inside your like assets directory. So this was kind of like failing that check because there's like, I technically had like Unity namespaces in the project. And so yeah, I maybe could have like sent the people reviewing it a note to say, hey, like I'm using these physics authoring components that are kind of required for this project. And it's like, I'm not using anything, and it was also like failing some other checks because of that. So I decided to, again, and this was like right at the end of development when I was like ready to submit everything. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I should probably just do it to move these over to the regular Unity box collider and rigid body, because like that's kind of what Unity seems to be pushing people towards using anyways. So I kind of just like spent like a whole day like moving everything over to the new box colliders and all that stuff. So Procreate and Photoshop for all the graphics, FL Studio DAW for all the music. Emily uses Reaper DAW for live sounds like the guitar and the chess sequence. That guitar chess sequence song is awesome. Let me, I'm going to play that right now for people. I think it's in music. Yeah. So good. So good. Heck yeah. Yeah, it's just straight up metal. Oh, you can't hear, of course. Awesome. I'll have to share the screen again. I'm just rocking out here by myself. All right, here we go. Mm. Yeah, awesome job with that one. Do you use pools for enemies? So I don't use any. The only pooling solution I use is actually for all the audio sound effects, because that still uses the kind of like regular game object stuff. So I kind of pool up a bunch of those game object audio sources, and then I'm playing all the sound effects through those. But for the enemies, because it's all on the ECS side, ECS like kind of almost does a pooling solution already, just because when you create a new entity, it creates that full like block of memory. Um, and um, like it just kind of like anytime you add a new entity or a new enemy, it just assigns the data values. Like the memory is already kind of pre-allocated. So it's like when you're creating new um, enemies, then like it's just kind of like filling in that data. Like you're not, creating, you're not necessarily allocating new memory until you go, over the limit of that um, uh, and or the chunk size, and then once you do that, then it's going to allocate another chunk. So that's again another one of the reasons that you want to kind of keep the memory footprint for each entity low, because you can fit a larger number of enemies in the chunk, and it takes a longer time to create that next chunk. And I cannot read this here, but I hope it's a good thing. um, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That chess sequence is so good. I mean, all the music is so good. I'm super happy with it, and yeah. What about particles? As far as particles go, the only particles I'm really using are when the player takes damage. There's just kind of like a little kind of splatter effect. Um, and like that one, I just like have like a game object with, I think there's like two particle emitters on it. Um, and that's just kind of like following the player. So it's like that's just always there. Um, well, actually, so yeah, I guess the other thing that I'm kind of doing is for like the damage numbers. So that I guess is basically pooled as well. Because yeah, I just kind of have like a world UI canvas, and then a bunch of little elements. I think that's what I'm doing, right? Must be. So yeah, I have a stack of these damage number UI controllers for this damage pool. I set the pool size to 1,000. That's probably way more than I need. But yeah, at the beginning, create a new one of these, instantiate all these little damage number prefabs, and push them onto the pool there. I mean, I probably need like 50, not like 1,000, but whatever. And then, yeah, when we display the damage number, we just kind of, pop them off the stack, set the position, display the number, and then, when the life cycle is over, we return it to the pool. So, yeah. Awesome. Glad to hear that you started the RTS project to learn ECS. That sounds like a ton of fun. I would like to do an RTS project at one point. I would like to do another one of these projects if people seem to like it. Seems to be going pretty well so far, but yeah, I mean, we'll see. I have some other ideas of some things that I would want to do, but for now, I'm just going to focus on kind of continually supporting this one. I do want to make some more updates. There's kind of some nice little quality of life features that I kind of would like to add to the game, and of course, I'll ship all the project files to the asset store product, and add some documentation if needed on any of that stuff. But yeah, how much do I use an eye enableable component? A lot. Sorry, there was just a massive gust of wind that came through. That kind of spooked me out. Um, but yeah, so I use eye enableable components everywhere. I have again, as you can imagine, a section of the documentation just dedicated straight up to enableable components and how I'm using them, and yeah, a good kind of video overview of that as well. But yeah, so I use these a ton for a lot of initialization is kind of a common one. So here's kind of a initial interesting one. Actually, is it the initialize character flag? So that's kind of one of the naming conventions that I took here, is that for empty enableable components, I'd say it's, whatever name and then append flag to it. And then, so this initialized character flag is, of course, added to anything through that character authoring, which, as we talked about a little earlier, both players as well as enemies have the kind of general character authoring. And then, so they'll both get this initialized character flag. And what I can do with this is I can have a, should have an, where is it, player? Yeah, so then now we can have I have an individual player initialization system that runs across any entity that has the initialized character flag enabled. And so this does the, player specific things for, this is kind of doing some stuff like setting up some of the level up data, doing some invoking for some UI flags, and yeah, this is kind of doing some UI stuff as well here. Or this is, setting the starting weapon. Yeah, just like saying which is the starting weapon there. So we're doing some player specific stuff. And then I also have a enemy initialization. And so this enemy initialization, this is, kind of doing just some stuff specific to enemies. Again, we're looking for anything with that initialized character flag. And then finally, you see that both of these systems actually run before this character initialization system. And then this character initialization system is, things that need to be done for all characters. So this would be both players as well as enemies. And then, so this does that whole initialization process. And then at the very end, we do set component enabled initialized character flag to false. So then that means that the player initialization, enemy initialization, and character initialization, would no longer apply for that entity. So, yeah, that's kind of one common way that I use these enableable components. I also use them for event-based stuff. So I think I've kind of briefly scrolled through is when we're taking damage, maybe we want a sound effect to play, or again, play a particle system, whatever. A lot of that stuff is done with enableable components as well. And I think another kind of interesting one is the character health regeneration. If I can find, if I can spell health regeneration correctly. Is this it here? No. Yeah, so this character health regeneration state, this is a data component, also an I-enableable component. Basically, anytime that this component is enabled, that means that health regeneration should be taking place. And then we kind of add, hit points in this little hit point accumulator, and then we can kind of, use that to regenerate health there. So yeah, use it for a lot. Sorry for my keyboard layout. Thanks for your tutorials. Your top #1 dots on YouTube, in my opinion. Yeah. Hey, Code Monkey's pretty good too. And shout out to Wayne Games, although he needs to make more videos again. More generic question. How do you keep in mind all components that you've created and which systems use which components in which combination? Gosh, I don't even know how I want to approach that question. I feel like it is kind of a big question. Honestly, I think one of the things that has been kind of beneficial to me, and maybe this doesn't, apply to everybody, but as you may have seen, when I'm typing along here, there's no form of autocomplete going on here. So I'm not using any, LLMs, AI, or not even any IntelliSense autocomplete, any of that. And I think it's really helped me be just a lot more like intentional about the code that I'm writing. And it really forces me to remember like what all the exact names of the types are. And, it kind of like, if I'm like typing something and it's like, okay, that doesn't make sense that it's called that. Like it's a lot more apparent when I have to like type out every character of that. Or when things like kind of don't have a lot of like consistency to them or whatever, it kind of like forces me to kind of rename things to make it a little bit more intuitive to me, and everything kind of has like a solid kind of naming convention. I think that's kind of helpful to kind of keep things all in mind there. But I don't know, other than that, like of course I can't keep everything in my mind, but just like having enough familiarity with my code base of like being able to kind of know generally what something is called and being able to like search for it very easily. I mean, Writer has this like, you hit shift twice and then you can just start typing in whatever type you need. And I think just, having a nice IDE like this where I can say, okay, where am I using, this character health regeneration stuff? And I can, scroll through here and see like, okay, yeah, I want to see, where I'm doing this. Can click through that. So I think just kind of, using your IDE to, its strength as well is just, super helpful for just kind of navigating the code base. So, yeah, I don't know if I probably have more to say on this, but I feel like I'd have to like think about that one for a little bit. And so I can just answer this one quick here. Not using any code assistant, no GitHub copilots, and like I just mentioned, no autocomplete at all. So I mean, we go here and I want to type in the additional hit points, nothing at all. Let's see, expanding on, do you have a system for planning out your data beforehand? Not really. I think it's just kind of taking things on a case by case basis where, just kind of like considering just really like breaking the problem down and like, yeah, I'll write it down on, I got one of these little remarkable tablet deals. So it's like, when I'm doing something that's like a little bit more complex, that's like, obviously there's like a lot of like easy things that like I've done a million times and I just like know what I need to do. I can just kind of do those. But for things that are like, okay, I haven't done something exactly like this. Like, let me kind of plan this out. That's where I want to like, go write some things down and be like, okay, what's the kind of input data that I need? What's kind of the output result data that I'm that I'm like looking for, and kind of like what's that transformation to get it from A to B. And it's like, okay, do I already have some of these things? Are there kind of some related components that I might be able to add to that can also store that data? How can I kind of like use what I already have, and like what are the either modifications that I need to make to that, or what are the complete new things that I need? And again, just kind of starting with that input data, output data, and then you can kind of like fill in the middle, which is that system that like again takes that input data, converts it to that output data. And yeah, so again, I really like the ECS workflow of just like keeping everything separate, like all these different um, transformations and a lot of the weapon behaviors and stuff. Like all this stuff is different, and they're all separate from each other. So I can like create these new behaviors, and they don't like necessarily affect the other things that I had already previously done. So a lot of the stuff is like very self-contained, which I really like. Dependency injection in dots, for example, UI manager or fmod. Yeah, that's not something that I typically do. I don't know if I necessarily have like a strong opinion on, why not, but yeah, I just not something that I'm necessarily using. Enable on one frame. Enable on one frame increase and then disable for time. Could you clarify what you mean on that? We already talked about that one. If each thing only does one thing, it's easier to keep track of. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. No IntelliSense, not needed. SRP is fun, but everything in public component is not good. I hate BCS because of that. I think having all the data be public is a lot better. Because I mean, you're just going to need to access it either way. So it's like you can just access it directly and not have to worry about creating all these weird accessors and all that. I feel like that just is a lot messier in my opinion. So the health, when you were talking about this, enable it on one frame, increase, and then disable for time. So okay, so what's happening is for the health regeneration, basically if your health is below max, then that health regeneration component will be enabled. And then there's a system that adds to that kind of like accumulation buffer. And the idea is we're kind of like adding fractions of a hit point to this health accumulation. I said a buffer, but it's really just a float value. And so we're just kind of like adding fractions of this to this every frame because, again, like a typical health regeneration value that you start with is like 0.2 hit points per second. So, we want to calculate it that by figuring out, what is the small fraction of a hit point that, we need to add to this accumulator. And then once that accumulator value reaches an integer value, typically it's just going to be 1, then we can add that 1 to the, full hit points. And then it just like continually does that. And then until you're at max health, and then the component gets enabled because we just don't need to do that health regeneration anymore. Having everything public can break object consistency. It's worse of all time to have side effects when you cannot track what affected object state, especially when many people are working on a project. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's fair. I think you can just still kind of like use some debug tools that are available to you. I know, ECS has a lot of like good debug tools, especially through like entities journaling, where you can see, specifically which systems are modifying what data. So, tracking things down has not been super difficult in the times that I've needed to. Lots of refactoring. I refactored my power systems 5 times before I was happy. Um, I didn't have to do like a lot of like multiple refactors on things, but there were a few times throughout the project where I had to do a major overhaul of some core systems, um, just due to, again, some kind of decisions that I had made early on in the prototyping phase that kind of ended up growing out to be larger things, realizing that that wasn't necessarily a good approach, and then, having to kind of, uh, you know, remove all that in favor of the kind of approach that I thought was to be a lot better. Um, and again, I mean, there were times where I had to do like a, full day plus refactor again of these like kind of core systems. And I was quite pleased with how smoothly it went, just because again, everything is all separated enough where, we can just kind of, again, rip out the things that I don't need anymore, and restructure or whatever that I want to do with them, and kind of add them back in the new way. And again, it doesn't affect the things that it doesn't touch, because everything's separate. And the things that it does need to interface with, as long as I just make those remaps correct, then yeah. Sometimes you don't know until you get to a certain point and then refactor. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely I mean, that's how you get into those situations. All right. Well, yeah, let me know if anybody else has any questions. Otherwise, I might be just wrapping it up soon here. But yeah, once again, definitely go check out Dot Survivors over on Steam. It's available for free. I think it's a pretty fun game to play. Of course, I still would like to update it, do some little quality of life things, and um, yeah, I think there's some other things that I would like to do there. Um, and actually, I can go back here, and yeah, we do have the Dot Survivors again over on the Unity Asset Store, where I have all the project files for this ship Steam game available to you for purchase, as well as this whole documentation site where I have again information on all the different kind of core pieces of the game, and just kind of like a lot of details into why I made a lot of the decisions that I made, and all this stuff. And again, a lot of this stuff is kind of like very specific to this project. It's not necessarily as a way of me saying, this should be, how you create everything in an ECS project. But it's more like, the decisions that I made for this specific project, and I'm giving a lot of context into why I made those decisions for this project. And so hopefully that can kind of like, get you to start thinking, if you're doing something similar to that, these are the reasons why you might want to make that decision. Or, if you're doing something else, then, you kind of have a bit of that context as to, again, why I made some of these decisions, and why you might want to make a similar or different decision for that. Input system, unless you covered it in the 4-hour video, which I will watch later. Yeah, so it is it is in that big tutorial. Yeah, it's not really like that crazy difficult for this project, because again, I mean, it's a survivors game, so the only input that the player has is the ability to move. So we go to input, like you can see that the input actions map here, we literally just have one action, which is the move action. And so this is the exact same as it is in the tutorial project. For that one, I just like, this one has WASD and the arrow keys, as well as the joysticks, so you can play this game on controller, Steam Deck, and all that. I think in that for our tutorial, I just do the arrow keys, but you could just, add the new, the gamepad bindings if you want those as well. So just WSD, how do you get that into ECS? So then that, it's actually very simple. So player authoring, where are we here? So we just have this get player input system, and I use a system-based system here. And the reason for that is that I do, because I have this dot survivors input actions as a member variable, um, and because this is a managed type and I want it to be a member variable of the system, so I have to use system base for that. And I mean, again, probably a little bit against the ECS data oriented pattern to have member variables on systems like this, but it's just super easy to do. You just have those input actions, and then in the on create a new instance of the input actions, enable them, and in the on update, you can just go to your input actions, the player map, the actual move action, and then read that vector to, and I just cast it to a float to, so I have that current movement. And then all you really need to do is I have this like character move direction, which is actually used by both enemies as well as player characters. And so both of these know, like, now that character, so now this means that the characters, regardless of being a player or an enemy, can use the same character move system to move them. And again, this is all kind of detailed in the 4.5 hour long tutorial that's up on YouTube right now. But both enemies and players are writing to their character move component kind of in the same way. And then all I'm doing here is just, actually writing that current movement to them. Thanks for the tutorials. You're the best. Why don't you collab with CodeMonkey on some videos? I did do a stream with him. Was that like a couple months ago now? Yeah. So yeah, we did a live stream a few months ago. But yeah, I mean, CodeMonkey's awesome. Would like to do some more stuff with him. He's great. Welcome in, Bonte. Appreciate you, man. Same way as CodeMonkey, I've been using system-based so I can grab it directly. Yep. And yeah, you lose burst. But I mean, you're not going to be able to use burst with the input system anyway. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, we're applying movement, to a character once per frame. It's not a hot path of code. So it's like, not something that is like super performance critical. Do you pause game during level up ability selection? Yes, I do. So the pause game is actually kind of interesting. I think I've kind of showed this trick that I do before. Pause manager. So yeah, when I want to pause the game, what I do is I just grab the whole initialization system group and the simulation system group. And that's kind of like where all of my game logic, as well as all Unity's, systems are running. So the initialization is kind of where a lot of like Unity's kind of like time tracking systems are, where it's like incrementing the elapsed time, and a bunch of things like that. And then simulation system group is like where the main gameplay logic is running. Also, all the physics stuff runs under this simulation system group here. So I just grab these system groups and just set the enabled property on them to false. And then that basically just means that any system inside those system groups don't get updated. So the game is effectively paused. So it is kind of a neat little trick. Seems to be working pretty well for me. And yeah, I think the only thing that you really need to consider is that when the systems get re-enabled, if you have any systems that have an on start running function, then that logic is going to get ran each time the game unpauses. So maybe there is some things that you want to add in there to have some like special things happen when the game, pauses or resumes or whatever. But yeah, other than that, it's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, so that kind of is the pause logic there. So yeah. Anyways, I think this is a nice, fun little launch party stream. Hope you guys have been enjoying Dot Survivors, the game, the asset store project, or the tutorial, I should say. Yeah, very excited to finally have this stuff out here. It's been a long time coming. Been working on this stuff for a number of months, aside from obviously all the other stuff that I have going on. So yeah, and I just want to thank you all for playing the game, purchasing the asset store product, going through the tutorial. I've been super happy with the feedback on it so far. And again, if this keeps going well, would like to do some more of these in the future. And so, yeah, when we come to that point, then I can kind of start to gauge people's interest in what types of things that I would want to do. But yeah, for now, enjoy Dot Survivors. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Actually, you know what? Before I officially end the stream, I want to do a sip of water here first. Want to do a little dynamic allocation. At the end of the show, we like to give a little shout out to something random, something cool. So I wanted to give a shout out actually to, first of all, shout out to Death Stranding. There was a new Death Stranding trailer out the other day, which is super cool. Shout out to Simon, who is a viewer of the channel, but also a YouTuber now. So I will drop a link to his channel here. He just quit his job as a game developer and is going to be going solo indie developer to basically go all in on his game. I met Simon at the past couple Unite events, and he's been showing me this game he's been working on. It's a ECS game. I don't know how much I want to talk about his game because I'll let him do that on his YouTube channel. But it is a cool looking game. I think it's a MMO type game made with ECS. And yeah, he just again put up this video where I guess he's going to be posting more of these kind of progress updates on his game and everything. So shout out to Simon, and very, very much looking forward to seeing some of your videos on your game here. So yeah, anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, super cool. We had Penzilla Design in here. Shout out again. Really appreciate all the work. And yeah, enjoy your weekend. Play some Dot Survivors, mess around with the Asset Store product, or even just go through the big 4.5 hour long tutorial, learn some stuff about ECS. So yeah, with that, see you next week. Hopefully next week. Again, I want to do some stuff for if there's any big GDC announcements. And oh, thank you for the test. The test worked. Awesome. Appreciate the support. All right. Well, thank you everybody. Take care, and we'll see you soon.